I'll need you to put on these gloves before going through the evidence.
On the ground floor of the Gaston County Courthouse, we find this cardboard box. Inside, the evidence from the Ira Yarmolenko crime scene, the 3 ligatures that were wrapped around her neck, a small floral bag from which one of those ligatures, a blue ribbon, had been torn.
And look at how tight that knot is.
Crime scene photos of her car on the banks of the river, all pieces of a Rubik's Cube of a case. Investigators spend 6 months working every possible lead and interviewing cooperative witnesses like Mark Carver repeatedly.
Did you see that little girl?
I told him I didn't know what happened to the girl, or I went up there and helped her.
Carver and his cousin Neal Cassada both volunteered DNA samples. Meanwhile, Ira's family works the media, keeping images of the smiling student, the carefree spirit that was Ira, alive in the public's mind.
We simply did the only thing we could do, contact local media and get information out there so that possible witnesses would submit information.
Pavel, a brother who won't quit, at one point appeals directly to the killer.
I have no doubt that once you truly realize how deeply you've hurt us all, you'll have no choice but to surrender.
It is not until 7 months after the murder that investigators finally catch a break. They have a DNA match. Traces of Mark Carver's DNA in one spot on the outside of the car, above the rear driver's side door. Neal Cassada's DNA is in 2 spots, on the inside of the right passenger window and on an armrest.
What kind of DNA are we talking about?
It's DNA where skin cells have been shed, and typically it's called touch DNA.
It is not blood DNA or semen, but police think it's enough, even though the 2 cousins had no obvious motive for murder.
The question that the DNA never answered and the police never could was why these men would kill Ira Yarmolenko.
Groping for answers, police come up with a theory that Ira had somehow seen Carver and Cassada doing something so outrageous they had to kill her to keep their secret.
Their theory was that Ira was down there to photograph and caught the men doing something that they didn't want anybody to know about. And so that the men violently strangled her and pushed the car down the embankment, and that's why their DNA was found on it.
So now Mark Carver finds himself on the hot seat.
Do you know what DNA is? I found your DNA inside her car. How can you explain it?
No, you didn't find mine.
Oh, yeah, I did. I did. I'm yours and Neal's buddy.
My DNA ain't in that car.
How much money do you want to?
I bet you $1 million. My DNA ain't in that car. I didn't know that car was even up there.
Hey, bye.
I can't help it, but I didn't do it.
You said you didn't see a car, you never heard a car, you never touched a car.
I
Lo and
didn't.
behold, guess whose DNA is inside a dead girl's car? Yours.
Over and over again, you keep telling the police, we didn't touch the car.
I told them, but they didn't believe nothing we told them.
In fact, during that hour-long interrogation, Carver denies seeing Ira or touching her car more than 50 times.
I'm telling the truth.
When the interview finally wraps up, police allow Carver and his cousin Neal Cassada to go home. But Neal's daughter Amy says the writing was on the wall.
He walked in and he was like, they're trying to pin this on me.
Did he tell you what they said to him?
Well, they were saying that they knew he did it. He just needed to confess it.
2 days later, before sunrise, police show up to arrest the men. They haul them back in and give them one last chance to confess.
All right, Neal, we got a few procedural things to do real quick.
This is Neal Cassada.
Y'all barking the wrong tree. I swear my mom was great, but I didn't have a thing to do with it.
No confession, no matter.
Police charge Mark Carver and Neal Cassada with her murder.
The 2 men are charged with first-degree murder, even though Neal Cassada had already passed a polygraph. The men appear stunned and confused at their arraignment the following day.
Like, everybody was just in shock. We just couldn't believe it was happening.
We do not want to go to trial until we have all the evidence
The man leading the charge against Carver and Cassada is Gaston County District Attorney Locke Bell. But it is a slow charge. Even after the men make bail,
Neal Cassada's family greeted him inside the Gaston County Jail tonight.
No comment, please.
Police continue to test and eliminate 8 other suspects. 2 years pass before prosecutors bring the case to trial. Then, on the eve of the opening arguments in Neal Cassada's case, a shocking development.
It was Sunday morning. The trial started on Monday. He was in the kitchen, and he told my mom that I'm having a little trouble breathing, and he just fell over.
Neal Cassada never gets his day in court.
Neal Cassada died in his Mount Holly home Sunday morning.
Those 2 years was very hard on him. He was so worried that he was going to prison for something he didn't do.
Even with one of the defendants dead, the state pushes forward with the prosecution of the other, Mark Carver, who at the time hires local defense attorney Brent Ratchford. Before the trial, Carver is offered the deal of a lifetime, plead guilty to second-degree murder, and spend just 4 to 8 years in prison. Ratchford thought the deal was a strong statement about the state's weak case.
I'd never gotten such a low offer. He turned it down without batting an eye.
I'm not going to plead guilty for something I didn't do.
You'd rather spend the rest of your life in prison?
Yeah.
Mark Carver walked calmly into court.
In March 2011, Carver's legal reckoning finally arrives.
He's upbeat and feeling good. He's innocent, so we're ready for our day.
At trial, prosecutors build their case on 3 key pieces of evidence. The first, Carver's proximity to the crime scene. If he were less than 100 yards from where Ira was killed, prosecutors argue his claim that he heard nothing that day can't be true. Detectives testify about an experiment they conducted on the river. One detective stood where Carver was fishing, another where Ira was. According to testimony, they spoke in normal voices and could hear each other.
We had a lot of issue with that, but it was allowed to come in anyway.
The second piece of evidence is that touch DNA found on Ira's car that matched Mark Carver. Prosecutors say it proves he touched the car and therefore must have been at the crime scene. And to drive that point home, the state has an ace in the hole. A moment from that interrogation where Carver, police testify, gave himself away.
I believe the words he used was a little thing or a little...
Detective William Terry was also in the room during that interrogation.
He said that she came up to him about right here.
The gotcha moment was when the police detective was recounting the interrogation and said that Mark Carver knew that Ira was little.
That moment is crucial. Carver had always said he had never seen Ira, so prosecutors ask how could he know how tall she was unless he was lying.
The very first thing I thought of was, they got you.
Judge Timothy Kincaid presided over Carver's murder trial.
That's what did it for you?
That was the turning point of that trial for me.
And with that, the prosecution rested its case.
Everyone was then sort of on the edge of their chairs waiting for the defense to present a case.
But to the shock of Carver's family, Ratchford decides the state's case is so weak, he will present no witnesses or evidence for the defense.
They could not explain how the crime occurred. Well, based on that, the jury's not going to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt.
They told us no way that they were going to be convicted.
They're wrong. It takes the jury just a few hours to return with a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder.
When I heard that verdict come down, I couldn't breathe. I was like, oh my God, they got it wrong.